Hello. I know that I said I'll see you in a minute, but I lied. It has been at least an hour since I finished my review of SOULar because I needed to eat. And now I am going to do my review of Home is Not a Country by Sofia Elilo. I will say two things. One, there has been sparkling wine, so to your health. Any mistakes going forward are my own. And second, I am wearing a cropped sweatshirt by Mess in a Bottle, and this one says feeling divided. And I wore this specifically for my review of Home is Not a Country because, well, you'll just have to read it, but I will simply say that it fits. So this is a debut work from Sofia Elilo. I don't even know, I'm trying to remember how I found out about this book, and I literally don't. I don't remember who told me about it. Yeah, I have absolutely no recollection, but I know that when I found out about it, I wanted to get a copy of it immediately because I was seeking a very intimate and dark and maybe chaotic or disorienting story. I knew that it was written in verse. I knew that it had been blurbed by Elizabeth Acevedo, which is always a very good sign. But I knew that I wanted a story that was written from an experience that was very different from my own. And I believe that Sofia is Somali, I think. Sorry, she's Sudanese by way of Washington, D.C. And that just makes me sad because I should have been in D.C., but anyway. I just knew that this would be something different. And I wanted something different. And this year, I don't know about you, but this year I've wanted to read stories that were dark, that dealt with insecurities, that dealt with uncertainties, because I knew that I wanted a way to see how fiction could help me kind of work through my feelings around COVID-19 and being in a pandemic world, and just sort of dealing with my own feelings that we are not going to be returning to the past, and that there is going to be sort of perpetual new normals all the time. And I think speculative fiction prepares us for that. So I just wanted to surround myself more with like dystopias and dark works. So SOULar being an example of dark work. And I think that Home is Not a Country is also dark work. It's beautiful and it's transformative. It's also extremely dark, and I loved every moment of it. Okay. I think that was the intro. Cue the rest of the thing. Okay. Home is Not a Country by Sofia Elilo. Nima doesn't feel understood by her mother, who grew up far away in a different land, by her suburban town, which makes her feel too much like an outsider to fit in, and not enough like an outsider to feel that she belongs somewhere else. At least she has her childhood friend, Haitham, with whom she can let her guard down and be herself. Until she doesn't. As the ground is pulled out from under her, Nima must grapple with the phantom of a life not chosen, the name her parents didn't give her at birth, Yasmin. But that other name, that other girl, might just be more real than Nima knows, and more hungry. And the life Nima has, the one she keeps wishing were someone else's, she might have to fight for it with a fierceness she never knew she had. So there were so many things I loved about this book. And if you want to see me experience it in real time, you should check out the Friday Reads videos that I did while I was reading this book. And I will come up and do the thing because I annotated this very differently. All I used was a black pen, and I was very sort of whimsical in my annotations. There were dots, there were curly cues. I wrote poetry in response to the verse, and it was a delightful experience. So the first thing that I noticed about this book was the gorgeous, dark, beautiful cover and the fiery colors. And then the second thing that I appreciated about this book was the wonderful foreword written by Christopher Myers. So this book is part of what seems to be a series of books that are designed to bring certain voices forward. It was forwarded by Christopher Myers, Make Me a World. So I'm just going to read the foreword because the foreword itself is so beautifully written, and it was just a wonderful kind of appetizer for what we were going to experience and for what I experienced while reading this book. It goes like this. Dear reader, the truth is, this is just one life of many you could have led. At some point, you made the choice to pick up this book, but you could have chosen something else to do. Before that, there were other decisions. You chose to walk down one street or another, to take the bus to talk to that stranger. Even earlier, there were decisions made before you were born. Decisions that have profoundly affected who you are right now, what language you speak, where you live, even how you dream. It seems to me that this knowledge that you could have just as easily been any one of 100 other people is at the heart of empathy. It's the realization that every person you meet or see on the news or hear about could have been you if you had made slightly different choices, or if your grandparents had made different choices, going way back into a great tree of different choices that looks like an entire world of people who aren't you, but might have been. Some people have the gift of understanding that they could have been other people. Naima is one of them. She understands that her own life is just one branch of a tree, and the seeds that became her could have just as easily become someone else. She rides her nostalgia at the strange here and there-ness that is every immigrant's story, to full visions of who she should have been if. And maybe we fantasize that we would be happier as that other person, or that we would run faster, or we would be more loved. So many stories are just about this thing, this fantasy of what it would mean to be someone else. All the lions and wardrobes, all the kids with secret powers, even the cats in the hats. But what they fail to realize is that just as much as there are the many people we could have been, these people live in the corners of imagination, and perhaps they're wishing that they could be us. Welcome, then, to Safia Elilo's Home is Not a Country, a tree of identities, of who we are, of who we could be, and the dangerous and beautiful places in between. And that was written by Christopher Myers. What a gorgeous introduction to this work. I disagree with some things that were said because as much as my ancestors had choices, my ancestors also did not in certain circumstances. And so I think I kind of scratch against the premise that, you know, where we are, where we have landed, where we become is simply a matter of choice. that is not the reality of those who have existed and survived and thrived under systems of oppression, although that is perhaps part of the story. With that caveat, though, I will say that this was a beautiful opening, and that after I read this, I thought that was an ode. That wasn't just an introduction, it was an ode. Let's get into the review. So you can go back to previous videos to hear about the 7 cowrie shell review system, but I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because I think that this is a book that's kind of hard to explain. I think it's best experienced. It is, I will say that I did experience this in hybrid fashion, so I read with my ears and I read with my eyes. And the audiobook was narrated by the author. And I believe she's a poet. Yeah, so let me tell you a little bit about her. So Safia Elilo is Sudanese by way of Washington, D.C. She holds a MFA from the New School and was a founding member of SLAM at NYU. She is the recipient of a Cave Canem Fellowship, a Wallace Stegner Fellowship at Stanford University, and a Ruth Lilly and Dorothy Sargent Rosenberg Fellowship from the Poetry Foundation. Safia is listed in Forbes Africa's 2018 30 Under 30, and her first book of poems, The January Children, won multiple awards. Home is Not a Country is her first book for young adults. It's a love letter to the diaspora communities she grew up in. Okay? So, oh, and she's got a website called safiamafia.com, so check that out. This is a 2021 release. And I will say this cover is stunning, and the jacket art was by Shaylin Wallace based on a photograph by Yael Marantz, and the design was by April Ward and Carol Lee. So, I mean, what do we know about Safia? We already know that she's quite decorated as a writer and a poet, that she is Ivy League educated, and that she is incredibly talented. So these are things one ought to keep in mind as we read her work and understand her work. But definitely this was a stunning piece of work. All right, so long story short, I gave this 7 cowries. Home is Not a Country was spectacular. World building. This is where, remember when I was reviewing SOULar and I was like, I thought I wrote down the word liminal. I wrote down the word liminal with respect to this book, but it also applies to SOULar. This was liminal because, I mean, as the foreword predicts, this is a story about a girl who encounters what could have been had her parents made different decisions. And she encounters that literally. And that is all I'm going to say about that. It's hard to describe this story without getting into it because it's so short and it's written in verse. So there's so much spaciousness to the way that the story is told. And I listened to this book and I also read it during my commutes to work. So I was on buses and subways and I was also walking while I listened to the book. And so there was something about being in transit that really helped me get into the mood of the book, because a lot of the book is about movement, transit, moving from one place to another, being in one place or another or in between. And she takes up these themes, talking about themes, the cowrie shell themes, she takes up these themes of being in one place or another or neither, especially neither, in really beautiful ways, you know? I am not an immigrant, but I have heard stories written by young people and authors who have had the immigrant experience about not feeling home at home and not feeling home in the new home and sort of being in somewhere in between. And I feel like Safia takes that in-between space and really gets us to kind of deal with it in a really literal and structured way. World building, one full cowrie. Point of view, one full cowrie. The main The main character is, single parent family. Her father died. She thinks about him a lot. She is poor or lower income. Her mother struggles and works and is fatigued all the time. They live in a building with a number of other immigrant groups. She has a best friend in the building. And for me, when I grew up, before our family moved to another city, which was another city, but it was literally a 10-minute drive from my first place. I spent the first maybe 10 years of my life living in a building, in a condominium, and it was full of immigrant families. And I had friends. I had a friend from, I think they're from Lebanon, and their family had immigrated from Lebanon. And then I had another friend whose parents had immigrated from Jamaica. And then I had another friend whose parents were not immigrants, but they were like an older white Canadian family. I don't know at what point they came over and how they came over. But our building was full of families, first generations, and also immigrants from all over the place. And so there was something nostalgic for me to read this story and to be reminded of like a building with people from all sorts of different places, sharing the elevator, sharing the space, sharing, the bus stop and the school and all of that. So that was really interesting to me. And I should say something here about language because, and this, I guess I'm going to be hopping around to different calories. I'll talk about the reading experience because listening to Safia speak was amazing, but also she speaks, I believe it's in Arabic. I'm pretty sure it's Arabic that she's speaking. But you hear her speak and it's beautiful. And you kind of have to, it's not like she explains what she's saying in Arabic or in the language that she's speaking in, but you simply have to understand it. Or, and I feel like for me, listening to parts of the story in a language that I do not speak helped me feel that sense of insecurity that comes when you don't know what's being said. And that helped me get into the story as well. So it was really, really beautiful. The magical elements were powerful. They crept up on me and I cried, and I remember feeling like I was wondering whether it was fair to call these elements supernatural, because Safia has a way of making the mundane seem magical and the magical seem mundane. And so I found myself at moments kind of saying, oh my God, it's just happening. Like, it's just a thing. It's just a thing that happens. And so I also found myself feeling when I was reading this, like, sometimes when I explain things to people about myself and about the way that I experience the world, especially when I'm talking to people about like homophobia that I experience, especially when I'm talking about homophobia in the Black community, sometimes folks are kind of like, what? I didn't see, is that a thing that happened? Like, I didn't see that. I didn't notice that at all. And sometimes it does feel like you're talking about make-believe, like imaginary things, but you're actually talking about reality. It's just not somebody else's reality. And I feel like there were times in this story where I was like, yeah, I get it. This isn't real. Like, this is a magical thing that's happening. But then I was like, well, isn't magic real? And aren't real things magical? And so that's what I mean by disorienting when I talk about disorienting books, like books that kind of get inside your cranium and force you to ask questions about things you thought you knew. So I loved Nima as a character. She's so kind and young and scared and sad and longing, and she's full of questions that aren't really answered by the elders around her, and so she has to find the answers herself. And she's so very vulnerable, and there are these moments of like impulse that she engages in throughout the story, and you know, she's protected, and it's amazing to see how she's protected. The story reminded me of also how when you're lost or you feel unanchored, you can be vulnerable, you can become attractive to predators. And I've certainly experienced that in my life, and I think that this story really spoke to the parts of me that remember that from my youth, and it was very satisfying to see how loved and held she was, even in the moments where her decisions resulted in her being placed at risk. I will say that the plot was really fascinating, but I also wanted more. And I think, I mean, the story felt closed and it ended and it felt complete, but I am thirsty for more of this world. So I think I've covered everything. World building, a full carry. Point of view, a full carry shell. Magical elements, a full carry. Relevance to Black queer lives, I gave it a full carry as well. There isn't an exploration of queerness, but there is an exploration of otherness that really spoke to me and my queer identities. The character development was wonderful. The themes were great. The plot was great. And what I wrote at the end of this was glorious, powerful, dark, stunning. The foreword was an ode, and top 10 for 2021. So this, I think that this book, that Home is Not a Country, pairs really well with Butter Honey Pig Bread. They landed very similarly with me, I think. So yes, so I want to show you, like, the reading experience was stunning, and I want to show you some things. So I'm gonna go walk around this hotel bed and show you some things. First thing, look at this. Look at this. Beautiful cover. Look at that. Gorgeous, rich reds, oranges, peaches, yellows, black, brown, white. Just a beautiful cover, right? And on the back as well. Stunning and beautiful. And then you've got a debossed cover. Soon you'll see the butterfly. Stunning. And the idea that you've got a debossed butterfly as opposed to an embossed one, or like a gold foil one, it just really speaks to the depression and transition that happens in this story. I will say that the end is a very satisfying payoff. And then inside, you will see my annotations. So that's the foreword that I talked about. There are illustrations inside as well. And as I mentioned, we've got verse. And that made this story, you'll see some of the dots. My annotations were very, very subtle. At points, lots of just dots and underlines, black pen, nothing bedazzled here, but there were moments where this is the, we've got another script here, right? In the writing. There were moments when I just answered the poetry. We've got a lot of wow moments, as you can see. There were times when I answered the poetry with poems of my own, I think. So I'm gonna see if I can find one. So I wrote something here in the corner just to remind myself of what I was reading. But I thought I had written something. Let's see. Oh, remember I said curly cues? I really felt like this story tossed me and turned me. And so there were lots of times when I just took my pen and just scrawled across the page because I just needed a way to kind of express that I was being taken by this story and that I loved it. So here, I'll just read this, the last part, to finally fit into a place. The story of why we left our country, our home, and even America takes on a new luster. At the thought that Baba chose it for us, that we were all meant to go together, to call a new country our home. And then I wrote, the ghosts of the stress our parents will not and cannot tell. This story definitely reminded me of the trauma of immigration, the promise of a new place, the grief of leaving an old place, and how it can sometimes be really difficult to tell your children the story of how hard it was for you to leave and why you sometimes want to go back. Hearts all over the page. This was a very, very, very glorious, triumphant story, and you should read it. All right, I'm gonna head back to front of camera. Oh, in this poem, Mom is cooking something, and I said love language. Okay. So, 7 full calories, 7 full calorie shells for Home is Not a Country by Sophia Elilo. I think you should read it. I think everybody should read it. And so I will say, read with purpose. Please put something red, orange, yellow, and a butterfly in the comments. I will see you in the comments. Thank you very much for watching. And the next book that I'm going to talk about is going to be The Year I Flew Away by Marie Arnold, but I am also going to talk about the November-December edition of the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. So I'll see you in a minute. Bye.